A budget is a statement of expected income and expenditure planned. Budget is a written format of expected incomes and anticipated expenditures. Every state government and the central government prepares its budget and puts it before Legislative Assembly in the state and Parliament at the center for approval. Components of a budget. The main components of a budget are 1. Receipts and 2. Expenditure. If the expenditure is more than the receipts, there will be a deficit and the budget is known as deficit budget. If the expenditure is less than the receipts, there will be a surplus and the budget is known as surplus budget. If the expenditure is equal to the receipts, the budget is known as a balanced budget. Family budget. Family budget is the budget of a family. All income includes the earnings of the members of the family, income from property, income from other sources, and other receipts including recovery of loans, borrowing, and so on. All expenditure includes 1. Expenditure on food, clothing, housing, and so on. 2. Expenditure on education, health, transportation, and so on. Other expenditures such as repayment of loans, interests, and so on. School budget. Every school also prepares a budget of its own. Its receipts and fees received from the students, grants in aid received from the government, and donations received from the public. Its expenditure is on payment of salaries to the teaching and non-teaching staff, purchases of books and stationery and laboratory equipment, construction and repairs of building, and on some miscellaneous items. Central and state budgets. Budget in general refers state budget or central budget. In order to streamline the income and expenditure, every government prepares a budget for each financial year. Budget reflects the policies of the government. Central budget refers to central government budget. Ministry of Finance prepares the budget of all the ministries and departments except railways. Finance ministers submit the budget in the Parliament. Railway minister presents his own budget of railways separately. At the state level, state finance ministers submit the state budgets in Legislative Assembly. After the finance minister presents the budget, the speaker allows some time for discussion. Members of the Parliament in the centre and members of the legislature in the state participate in the discussion. After a thorough discussion, the finance bill is passed authorizing the government to raise the revenues and to meet the expenditure as planned and proposed in the budget. This is done through an appropriation bill. Classification of receipts and expenditure. Total receipts are classified as 1. Revenue receipts, 2. Capital receipts. Revenue receipts include tax revenues and non-tax revenues. Capital receipts include recovery of loans, other receipts, and borrowings and other liabilities. Total expenditure is classified as non-plan expenditure and plan expenditure. Again, each is classified as revenue expenditure and capital expenditure. Thus, total revenue expenditure is the sum of non-plan expenditure and plan expenditure on capital account. The Union Budget 1997-98. The Union Budget for 1997 to 98 was presented by the Union Finance Minister of the Government of India on 28/2/97 to the Indian Parliament. Deficits. 1. The revenue deficit. The excess of government's revenue expenditure over revenue receipts constitute revenue deficit of government. 2. Budget deficit. The budget deficit is the difference between total receipts and total expenditure, both revenue and capital. 3. The fiscal deficit. It is the difference between the total expenditure of government by way of revenue, capital and loans, net of repayments on other hand, and revenue receipts of government and capital receipts which are not in the nature of borrowing but which finally accrue to government on the other constitutes gross fiscal deficit. The primary deficit. Gross primary deficit is measured by gross fiscal deficit reduced by gross interest payments. Balanced budget. A budget is said to be balanced if the revenue of the government is just sufficient for meeting its expenditure during the period under consideration. Deficit budget. A budget is said to be deficit if the expenditure is more than the receipts. In modern times, deficit budgets are common. Deficit will usually be filled by imposing additional taxes.